Welcome everyone to SionBen Harari's and Manuel Espaillat's podcast. First of all, I want to start off by saying we hope all of you are safe during these unpleasant times and wish you best of luck for the upcoming months. We know that this is a difficult time and would like to provide an entertaining podcast where we will be discussing racism and anti-Semitism. During the podcast, we're going to have two special guests who are knowledgeable and experienced in these topics. We hope you enjoy the podcast and stay safe. So, Manuel, one question. To begin with, what does racism mean to you?
Great. So, racism is when you discriminate someone from a different race based on the belief that your own race is superior than theirs.
So, now that we know what racism is, what are the origins of racism in the United States and where did it come from? When did it originate and how did it originate?
Well, great question. So, racism in the US began in the early 17th century with the arrival of African slaves being forced to work under harsh conditions in the US, mainly on farmlands. Most of those Africans in the US worked as slaves in the southern states, but those who did not work as slaves, laws were created by the US not allowing colored people own properties or vote. Whites from the beginning were the majority, and they had a belief that dark skinned people were inferior to them.
Interesting. So,
Yeah.
now that we know what racism is and where does it come from, do you think there's a difference in racism in today's world compared to racism in the past?
There definitely is. In today's world, racism is different because laws have been created to prohibit any form of slavery. Additionally, there are laws that prohibit verbal assault and physical abuse toward others with the reason of the significant other being racially different. Racism is mostly done in positions of power and in ways which are not significantly obvious. For example, police officers showing abuse and mistreating colored people compared to how they treat whites, and in ways such as the government assigning red and yellow labeled areas that colored people should be designated to live in, without the freedom of choice, thus segregating neighborhoods by color. So now we have an interesting video showing how racism is still a problem in today's world and why it is a very important topic to discuss. Sion, if you would please show our viewers the video.
Sure. One second, let me share my screen.
Yeah, thank you.
The United States is often called the Great Melting Pot, but it's a country that's struggled with race relations throughout its history and still does today. A 2015 CNN and Kaiser Family Foundation poll found about half of Americans think racism is a big problem, one that doesn't seem to be getting better. Two-thirds said racial tensions in the United States had increased over the last decade. More than half of Blacks said they had experienced some form of racial discrimination in their lifetimes, from being denied a job to fearing for their lives. About a third of whites and Hispanics reported similar experiences. Blacks and Hispanics were also far more likely than whites to say that they had been unfairly treated in the last month in a public place, such as a restaurant or in a store, because of their race. Segregation is still a reality as well, at work and at home. 60% of whites said their work colleagues were all or mostly white, and close to 70% of whites said either their social circle or their neighborhood was mostly white. When asked if certain factors, like discrimination, a lack of educational opportunities, and broken families, played a major role in the social and economic problems facing their communities, the majority of Blacks and Hispanics said yes. But even so, there is optimism. A majority of Blacks and Hispanics aged 18 to 30.
Perfect.
That was an interesting video, Manuel. I really like
Yeah.
that one. Thank you for
Yeah,
sharing.
yeah, of course.
So, what beliefs build the term racism? Like, how did it come up? How did racism come up?
Yeah. Okay, so beliefs such as whites having a sense of superiority over colored people because how whites typically in the early 17th and 18th century had a better education or job title than colored people.
Wow. Oh,
Yeah.
that's bad. So, what is present day racism like? Like, what do you see day to day, or what, if you experience racism, what would you experience?
Yeah. Okay. So, well, in the US, present day racism is not verbal or physical, and it does not stand out as in the past because nowadays, colored people do have rights and have the ability to speak and live freely just as any white man or woman. Present day racism is normally seen from those who are in positions of high leadership. For example, schools being much more strict on punishments taken at colored students because of their behavior. Present day racism can also be noticed in how the unemployment rate is much higher within the colored communities rather than the white communities.
Okay, interesting. So, Manuel, do you believe that racism is still a major part of white people's American culture?
Well, yeah, I do believe. Well, racism has decreased drastically in the US, and we see many young African Americans being mixed in with young whites, and that is the dream visionary people such as Abraham Lincoln or Martin Luther King had dreamed of. However, I do believe racism is still a part of the US, not in obvious ways seen in the past, but by abuse of power over colored people and segregation of neighborhoods and bank denied loans because of racial differences.
Wow. And the bank part really, I never thought about that. I never heard. But
Yeah,
wow,
yeah, it's a true thing that happens.
wow. Do you believe racism has only been a part of American history, or has racism impacted other countries as well?
Well, not at all. Uh, Racism has been seen and can be seen throughout the whole world, and not just from whites against blacks, but also there has been racism over religious purposes in the Middle East, such as Muslims hunting down Christians. Another form of racism has been how Hitler used the Nazis in Germany to hunt down all the Jews and exterminate them just because of their difference in cultures. In fact, racism has not only been our problem in our century or millennium. We can see harsh racism in times when Jesus was alive in Jerusalem and how the Romans chased him down for being a Christian and worshiping only one God, which was much different than other idol gods.
That's 100% true. I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah.
So, Manuel, if you have the power to change how people think about colored people, what would you do? Like, what changes would you make? What would you tell people?
Oh, great question. I believe that for any person who is firmly opposed to racism, I will let all those know that being racially different or part of a country's minority is not a weakness. And I would let all people know that God sees us all as equals in His eyes, no matter our color, race, religion, or ethnic background.
Perfectly said. So, do you believe that racism will end in the future, or what do you think?
Well, it's a tough question. But this is one of my many dreams in which racism completely disappears out of the face of the earth. And racism has indeed decreased by colored people in the US having all rights and freedom of speech, just as any white male or female. However, racism is still seen today, and I do not believe racism will end, because as long as there is power and inequality, those in power will feed off of those who are in the minority groups or who are racially different than the others, mainly to boost their egos.
Wow, that was a powerful statement.
Yeah.
There are many disadvantages to racism, as we all know. However, in your imagined system, what could be some advantages to the new system without racism?
Well, first of all, in my new imagined system, racism would not be a part at all, since I am totally against it because it demonstrates or demoralizes and discourages a person. Advantages to my new imagined system would be such as everybody is truly treated as equals, and there will be no imaginary line between those who are colored and those who are not.
Perfectly said again. So, if you could name two or three people that have made a big influence in making racism end, who would it be and why would it be?
Yeah, of course. Okay, so there's a good question because there are so many people to think about, but I chose two that really impacted me. One is from the past, and one has currently been present in our time. But the first two that come to mind are Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who inspired so many young African Americans to stand up for their community, and he functioned as a beacon of hope for all those colored people who suffered so many injustices. Dr. King addressed the nation through his famous speeches and touched many lives while opening the eyes of those who created injustice to find a way to restore equality. It is a very easy it is very easy to think of those who have made an impact to end racism in the past, but a key figure in the present day who has lifted the African American community spirit is Barack Obama. Well, Mr. Obama is not the only African American to be president of the United States, and he served his country with great sacrifice and lifted the United States to all its glory. By being a president who valued his nation above all, he showed that no matter his color, his duty was to lift, protect, and maintain the pride of the American nation.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Barack Obama, I couldn't think of anyone better.
Yeah.
So, after learning about this, do you disagree with some of the voices talking about racism? And if so, why do you?
Well, after reading many articles and many books throughout my life and the start of my college education in classes such as AU Experience, I still have not found any author or article that has made me disagree with what I believe. However, I do think there are many articles that are racist and should be strictly revised, such as due to the ignorance these writers have had when favoring a controversial topic such as racism.
One last question, and we'll end racism, our part of racism. So, to end this topic, what do you think needs to be done to end racism for?
Oh,
Sorry, Manuel, I think we lost you there for a minute.
yeah,
So, to end
sorry,
this topic,
my connection, but okay, let's keep on.
we understand. To end this topic, what do you think needs to be done to end racism for good?
Well, great question. Well, I think we should start with educating the young and stating the importance of implementing a social system where there is complete equality without any trace of racism. I am a firm believer in making parents tackle the issue at home, and implementing the topic in education system is key in becoming a country where racism and abuse of power over those who are in minority groups such as should not even be spoken of.
Better, couldn't be better said. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Manuel, for your time and your effort.
Of course. Thank you.
Now we will have one special guest who will talk about his experience with racism in the United States.
Yes.
So here we have a fellow student from AU. His name is John Caris, and he's going to talk a little bit about racism.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So, John, one question. Have you ever experienced racism in your community?
Personally, I've witnessed many different forms of racism, whether it be verbal, through social media, but the one that we've been discussing in my AUX class is the racism that is at the University of Chicago, a really prestigious university from where I was born. There's a book, and when I was looking over, I think it's chapter 10 or 9, it talks about how there's been countless times where the University of Chicago has kind of crossed a line in terms of, what is racist and what's not. And the University of Chicago went ahead and, has professors going ahead and saying the N-word on a casual basis. And the professor argues that that's just his form of freedom of speech. I'm sorry, but I believe that word is one of the most despicable words you can use, as it refers back to, the slave era in the 1800s, 1900s, 1700s, dating all the way back to I don't know how long. But you also have a lot of students in other communities other than Chicago, where they're saying the N-word in songs and it's caught on video, like we did see at American University over the course of this year. There's a lot of things that we are letting go by that needs to stop. And I don't know whether or not it's because, we're too lenient or whatnot, but there has to be something that has to change. And I just don't know what that is, because I feel like a stereotype that's dated back to God knows when about, one race having more power over another, it's utterly ridiculous. And it is something that has been instilled in some people's brains. I don't know why. And they use it to their authority. They use it as a bullying mechanism. And it just has caused a lot of, angry people like myself, when you see people just trying to take advantage of others for the color of their skin.
John, you couldn't have answered that better. Honestly, that's 100% true. Like the way they're using racism right now is horrible. So, do you think that racism will evolve to something different in the future? It will change for the better, for the worse. What do you think?
I will admit that there has been a lot of progress over the years. We had the first candidate as a African American president in Frederick Douglass. And, in 2016, or excuse me, 2008, we had our first African American president of the United States, and President Obama. So, from African Americans being basically outlawed, being treated like totally different people, that there has been some progressiveness that we have seen in the United States. I just think in terms of racism, it's one of those things where you really must take into account the audience you're dealing with. There are some people who completely agree with us in the sense that racism is one of the worst things you can lash out to someone about. It hurts. I mean, and rightfully so to those people that are affected by it. Racism is not only with African Americans; it's with, the Hispanic community. It's with, people that, have a disability.
Asian communities also.
Yeah, the Asian community. There's a ton of communities that are affected by this, and it just continues to grow on certain levels. And I think that's also due to social media. Social media has a really big impact on, how we view things, how we look at things. And I think social media has done an okay job of, I don't want to say, revealing who some of these terrible people are, but I can say it because that's what it has been doing. And, it's given a better light into a topic that wasn't really easy to talk about, before, I don't know, before the 1900s, before the 2000s. It's still a sensitive topic today, which I totally understand. But yeah, I do see, racism becoming less and less of a problem. But obviously, there are certain people, there are certain groups who continue to ingrain in other people's heads and their own that racism is okay. And obviously that is in my opinion, sorry for using it, stupid. But I just think overall, will it become better? I mean, I would love to hope so. I mean, I think if it does become more of a problem, then there is something as a community, as a country, as a world, where they are not doing something right. And I think then everyone would have to, look themselves in the mirror and say, we have a problem. And I think that is what we're trying to do. We're trying to, build um, build a bigger movement towards, anti-racism in all forms. Something that's going on now with the coronavirus is you're seeing a lot of the Asian community being put into a position where they're getting a lot of hate. They're getting a lot of racist remarks towards them due to a virus that is not truly their fault. It's
Well,
it's
as
it's
Asians have the blame, but actually,
go ahead. Sorry.
so yeah. So I was just saying, like, people kind of blame Asians for this virus, but they don't have the blame. Like, it was something that was going to happen, whether or not it was like starting with the Asian community or whatever community, but it was going to happen no matter what.
Yeah, and for them to take the blame and for people to spew remarks at them on all different forms, whether it be social media, whether it be, in person, they don't deserve it. And that's a form of racism. And that goes to show you racism just creates more barriers than we already need. In a time like this, we need unity. We need people to come together and, face this virus head on. You know, a pandemic like this is a scary thing, but I also think it's a reality check to a lot of people so that we can understand how serious something like this can be and how serious something like this can turn out. I mean, there's over 250,000 deaths worldwide. There's over 2 million people infected. I mean, I don't know. Did you guys ever play the game Plague Inc. when you guys were in middle school or in high school? Yeah.
Explain that game.
It's basically, if you know what it is, it's you just you create a virus and you put it in a country, and advance the virus with what it can do, whether it be like instant death or a silent death or whatever you want to call it, and it spreads. It's basically what's going on now, and I just think that, like I said, in a time like this where unity is most important, the last thing we need is to be putting blame on others. So I go back to it with my U Chicago reference. Something like that only creates a bigger barrier than we really need right now. And I think in general, we don't need something like that where, there's disregard for someone or, hatred towards someone. And even more so, when people want to talk to you and you spew those types of remarks and they know that you do, they're going to have a sort of dislike towards you back. So you're creating just a negative, outlook, image of yourself or image of whoever it be that wants to talk about that type of thing. And it only creates a bigger barrier. But going back to your original question, do I see racism becoming more of a problem or less of a problem? I really think that as a country, we're trying to do the right thing in terms of, creating a lot of opportunities for all forms of ethnicities, all forms of people. And I hope by, 2030, whenever, I don't know, whenever I'm a dad or whenever I have grandkids, that I don't need to talk about this anymore. Even the talk of something, even something spoken, like even something that I talk about when it comes to racism, I just don't want to be having this conversation because it shouldn't be a thing. Obviously, there's history behind it, and we have to acknowledge the history, and we have to acknowledge that this has happened. But I think if
Well,
we,
I think it's also good to talk about the history, like to make our kids, future kids, like know that how wrong it was, like to call an African American the N word. It was so wrong to do so. So, like talking about the history and why these people should be equal to any of us.
yeah,
To
like I was saying, like the history we need to acknowledge. I mean, that's something that is a necessity because, like you said, we need to teach future generations what is right and what is wrong. And something that is definitely wrong is racism. And if anyone were to dispute that, then they're crazy because
yeah,
I don't care what you say. My dad is, in the med, he's in the industry of a physician, and he says every time you open up someone, no matter if you're African American, Asian, Caucasian, um, Italian, doesn't matter.
Whatever race, whatever ethnicity, gender,
Everyone is the
whatever.
same. Everyone has a heart. Everyone has lungs. Everyone has a brain. And the fact that you should discriminate against someone who's literally the same as you is ridiculous. So overall, I think this will become less of an issue over time because I think the more we acknowledge it, the more we understand that this isn't right, the less it will become of a problem. But I just think for people that are the exact same on the inside, we shouldn't discriminate because they're like us. They're they are us in a sense. You
They're
know,
the same.
so when I look at you know when I look at you guys, or when I look at my best friend from high school, who is African American, I don't see a difference. There's no difference to be seen. You guys are the same person, it's different personalities. That's the only difference. But every person has a unique personality, and that's what makes them amazing. But I just I just hate talking about why we need to change things. I just wish something could be done sooner. I know I've said that so many times, but I can't talk about racism and not just hope it can go away. But there has to be steps that we can do to kind of change that and make racism a non-issue in the very near future.
yeah,
Yeah, hopefully, like everything you just said is 100% true. Like I would love to imagine myself living in a country where, like, me being Jewish and Latino, living without the fear or thinking that someone out there is thinks he's better than me or whatever. Like I want to live peacefully or whatever, just like you. You want to have your kids and your grandkids to not to be afraid of who they are.
yeah.
And John, to end this podcast and these questions with you, how would you describe racism? Like, what does it mean to you, and what is your definition to it?
Um, that's a to me, racism is any negative connotation or stereotype against a particular race or people. Um,
Different than your own, correct?
yeah, different than our own. And I think that definition in itself, if it were to be spread more, would do a lot of change to a lot of different people.
Yeah,
You know, my race, your race, everyone's race may be, different, but at the same time, there's no reason to talk against or speak ill against someone you really don't even know. And that's what actually does bother me the most. I didn't mention this. You know, when you see someone that you don't even know and you're able just to have a negative connotation about them, it
yeah,
it really is it's really I don't even I can really just say it's really screwed up. It's really despicable. Like that's just something that shouldn't happen. And I think, what was the second part of your question, Sion?
And what does it mean to you? If you have to explain in a few words, or how would you feel about racism? Like, what does it
Well, I
mean?
mean, how I feel about it is I think it's something that needs to be known. I mean, racism is something that some people, even when they're young, don't really know about, only till like you become a little older. And then you understand like a better definition of it. And now, at our age, I think we have a pretty good grasp of what it means. And I think when you know that definition, that alone should not give you the incentive to say something against someone else.
Yeah.
So, you
Mhm.
know, overall, I just think I think it's a really important topic to talk about. And I'm glad AUX has decided to kind of bring this to light, in a like, with a topic that's so sensitive to talk about. I know for some people it may be very uncomfortable, but in a setting like this, with you guys, even in a podcast like this, I think it's really important, for people to hear it. So, I think what you guys are doing is great. So, thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you for answering our questions, and thank you for being here. Your everything you just said was 100% true, and we couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah.
So thank you, John.
Thank you.
So now Manuel is gonna ask me some questions about anti-Semitism, and there you go, Manuel. You can ask me whatever you want.
Thank you, Sim. And for those who still don't know my name, I'm Manuel Espaillat, and welcome to our podcast. So now we begin with our second topic, about anti-Semitism. So, Sion, how would you define anti-Semitism?
It's simple. To me, anti-Semitism means hate and prejudice towards the Jewish people. This may sound very broad, but looking back on history, every major event against the Jewish people occurred due to these two simple reasons.
All right, perfect. Thank you. So, deep diving into anti-Semitism, could you explain the origin of when it was traced or how?
Sure. So there are no traces on when anti-Semitism began. So as we know now from now. However, the Jewish faith did not recognize Jesus as a Messiah. Therefore, the Jewish people were accused for his crucifixion. After that, Jewish people's faces were put into the eyes of Satan. This is horrible because we know that this didn't happen and the Romans crucified Jesus. Jews were called murderers of God and even the devil's workers. During these times, Jews had limited to no rights since they could not own land and their only occupations could be money lending, commerce, and trade.
Wow, that's very interesting, and it's so sad to see how they suffered. But well, thank you for that. Okay, so moving on. So what are some major events that marked the Jewish people regarding anti-Semitism?
So yeah, interesting question. There have been too many events that Jews had to suffer due to anti-Semitism, either stabbing, false accusations, genocides, mass murders, and expulsions are some of the few ways that Jews have been attacked due to hate and prejudice. Two of the major events that marked Jewish history was the Holy Inquisition and the Holocaust. Those are the biggest ones, and the ones that are the most popular, the most famous ones.
Definitely, and we can see how, if not the major events have been happening in the world, the Holocaust.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. Okay, so moving on. So, Sion, what is the Holy Inquisition, and what does it mean to you?
So, in a few words, the Holy Inquisition was the expulsion of the Jewish people from Europe and the persecution of converted Jews who still practiced Judaism after converting to Christianity. This was all ordered by the Catholic Church to be implemented in every European countries and their colonies who followed the Catholic Church. These included Spain, Portugal, and many more. This occurred for roughly 700 years from year 1231 to around year 1826. This means a lot to me since my ancestors used to live in Spain for hundreds of generations, and were expelled and then migrated to Aleppo, Syria due to the Inquisition. This has shaped my family since our traditions nowadays are based on Spanish, Middle Eastern Jewish culture. And to be clear, this my father's side of the family, since my mother's side of the family was from Eastern Europe.
Perfect. Wow, it's so interesting. That's cool that you're related to this topic.
Yeah.
So now moving on. So what is the Holocaust and how has it affected you?
Okay, the Holocaust was a horrible time for the Jewish people. So the Holocaust was a mass genocide against Jews, gays, gypsies, and many others. Approximately 6 million Jews died, and many families were torn and affected. To summarize the facts, the Holocaust was all Hitler's plan to make his Third Reich pure and exterminate everyone who was not Aryan and opposed his beliefs. The Nazis built their regime from hate towards the Jews, blaming them for everything that was wrong in Germany, either economically, socially, or whatever was wrong over there. I feel a connection to this event since I lost my great grandfathers and I had to hear stories of the pain and suffering that my great grandfather had to live. And to be clear, this is my mother's side of the family, my other side of the family.
Wow, that's a very tragic story. I'm sorry to hear that.
No worries.
So many families lost their lives, children, wives, husbands.
Yeah,
It
it's
was
horrible to see
very
the
hard
facts,
times.
and if you see pictures, it's horrible. It's
Yeah,
devastating.
yeah. Okay, so moving on, and why are you so interested in this topic of anti-Semitism?
Look, I believe that everyone should know about this topic because if some people are ignorant, any major anti-Semitic or any other mass murder due to oppression is destined to happen again. There's one quote that I really connect deeply to by George Santaya, which is, "Those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it." This means that if people don't learn that anti-Semitism, racism, all brought like the Holocaust, the Inquisition, we're destined to have a mass genocide once again. So we need to make people know what's happening around the world and make them stop it.
That is correct. Very interesting. Thank you for that. So
Sure.
now, is anti-Semitism a problem in today's world or is it not?
It definitely is. It definitely is a problem right now. So there's many places where Jews are persecuted right nowadays. These might include the United States, Europe, Israel, and many other countries. Almost every country, I think. There have been recent attacks on synagogues and people who are Jewish. Anti-Semitism is rising at an alarming pace in the US. According to the New York Police Department, half of the 423 actions against hate in the 2019 were directed towards the Jews. This meant that any protest against in hate, any violence, or whatever it was, half of the 423 were towards the Jews. Another example might be the attack in the synagogue in Pittsburgh that resulted in 11 Jews dead during their time of worship when they were praying.
Well, these Jews have been suffering a lot. That's
Yeah.
very tragic. Well, so what do you say the difference is between anti-Semitism and xenophobia?
Well, that's a good question. Um, e- Anti-Semitism means hate and prejudice towards the Jews. That's very simple, as we know, as we explained before. But xenophobia, on the other hand, means hate towards someone that has the different beliefs, traditions, cultures, and nationality, many other traits compared to you. So, for example, if someone may be xenophobic if they hate, um, if they're racist.
All right, thank you. So now moving on, if you were able to make changes to this issue of anti-Semitism, what changes would they be?
Honestly, I would warn people that anti-Semitism and xenophobia has led to atrocious things in the past, and that if the population who is anti-Semitic keeps rising, we're destined to repeat history, either something similar to the Holocaust, the Inquisition, or whatever is similar to that. To be completely honest, the only thing that I would change is to eliminate anti-Semitism completely and make it go away.
For sure. I would too. Okay, so if you could imagine yourself living in a world without anti Semitism, how would you describe this world?
Oh, I wasn't expecting this question. So that's a really good question. If I had to imagine myself living in a world without anti-Semitism, I wouldn't know where to start explaining. To begin, I will be able to live safely without the fear that someone might attack me due to hate and prejudice just because I'm Jewish and they're not, and they hate it. Besides that, I will be able to talk about my religion freely and not worry that what I say will harm me in any way possible, either mentally or physically. And for me, a world without anti-Semitism would be the greatest thing that I could ask for.
Yeah, definitely. To me, a world without racism would be incredible. But
Yeah.
okay, so moving on, do you think there are advantages in your new system regarding anti Semitism?
There would be a million advantages if anti-Semitism is eliminated completely. The first one will be that Jews will not be afraid that any harm may be done to them or their family members. They will be able to walk freely around the streets, travel freely, visit any country without the fear that they will be attacked. They will
Right.
also be able to live happily and peacefully, no matter in what country, what state, what town, or what house they live in.
Yes. That would be very hard in today's world to live with so much anxiety or pressure of someone attacking you for what you believe in.
For who you are and what you believe in, just like you
Yeah.
said it.
Okay. So now moving on, if you could choose two or three people who have made an impact against anti-Semitism in your life or in the world, who would they be?
Well, there are so many people that have made an effort to make an impact on anti-Semitism. I'm gonna try to narrow it down to two people that have impacted me and helped me understand the issue much clearer. The first and most important figure will be Elie Wiesel and his book Night. In this book, he talks about his life, Elie Wiesel's life, during the Holocaust and his experience living in a concentration camp. This this person in this book contributes to the topic of anti-Semitism because it provides an example of someone who lived a traumatic experience where anti-Semitism was a major issue. Like during the Holocaust, anti-Semitism was their life. They had to live 24/7 under Nazi rules and be tortured and even killed. And the
Yeah,
second important and influential figure that I want to talk about is Oskar Schindler and the movie about him, Schindler's List. I chose this specific figure in the movie because it tells a story of a non-Jew who was who was against anti-Semitism and against the Nazis, and decided to fight for his beliefs and help some Jewish people escape from the torture of the Nazis. This means that not all people are anti-Semitic, and knowing that there are people like that in the world makes me feel a lot better and a lot safer.
definitely. I would feel the same too. Okay, so thank you for that. Now, last question, and if you could tell me one thing that I should do to avoid the spread of anti-Semitism, what advice would you give me?
So, Manuel, it's very simple. Just don't do it yourself. And if you ever witness somebody else doing it, just intervene and make him understand that what he's doing is wrong, and it really affects people, and they get not scared, but it hurts people like that. So now I'm going to show a video of something that when a person intervened in the subway in London against an anti-Semitic person.
Perfect.
Like, behold, I will make them come and worship, and behold, I will make them of the synagogue of Satan, which say they are Jews, and are not, but do lie. Behold, I will make them come and worship before your feet. And I know that I am loved in you. See? Yeah, my face, I will smack you right in your nose, man. Back up from me. I'm not no Christian pastor. Back up from me, bro. But what are you gonna do? Whatever. Off. Simple as that. Listen, these people are imposters, trying to claim our heritage, and they're trying to tell me that's right. And they're fighting the slave trade, and that's okay. Do you care about your people? Do you care about your people? Why are you wearing trousers, man? You should be wearing trousers, man. So you know you're man. It's talkers. No, it's not my opinion. It's God's word. God's word. Yeah?
You can see
Wow.
from this video that once they tell him to stop, he still talks and talks and talks, but he packs his bags and leaves, and he starts
Yeah.
leaving. So you can tell if someone decides to stop it and believe that anti-Semitism is not worthy of fighting for, and they can change the world.
Yeah, that was very impactful because he kept on speaking and he even talked about slave trade that was,
That was impacting.
thank you for that.
Sure.
So now, before this podcast, we asked ourselves this question. Okay, so thank you for that video. And now we will have a fellow Jew who will talk about this topic of anti-Semitism and will relate to her experiences or what she has seen throughout the world. Here we have Valeria Abadi. She is a fellow Jew from Panama. And she is a friend of Sion's. And I will be asking her quick 2 questions about anti-Semitism. Hello, Valeria.
Hello, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, of course. So let's start with the first question. Have you ever experienced anti-Semitism, and if so, when?
Personally, I haven't experienced anti-Semitism. However, I do know people who have, and they have told me that they will never wish it upon me.
Perfect. So following up with the second question, do you think that anti-Semitism will end for good?
Honestly, after reading about anti-Semitism that has grown exponentially in the USA, I am sad to say that I do not see it disappearing anytime soon. However, I would love to imagine myself in a world where I do not have to worry about being physically or mentally harmed due to my religion, beliefs, and culture. The world will be much more peaceful.
Yes, for sure. We would all like to live in a world like that.
Yeah.
Thank you for answering these questions.
Thank you,
So-
Valeria, for being here. It's an honor to have you and hearing your words about anti-Semitism and your experience.
All right. To end this podcast, we ask ourselves this question. What are the similarities amongst these two ongoing issues between racism and anti-Semitism? We tried to find the answer, but it was clear that we were not understanding the question. We thought that there had to be at least one similarity between racism and anti-Semitism. After a long discussion, we came to the conclusion that racism and anti-Semitism are kind of the same. For example, racism is when you discriminate or hate someone from a different race. Some examples might be skin color, gender, religion, culture, and many others. On the other hand, anti-Semitism is the hate, prejudice, and discrimination towards the Jews. We can see with both definitions that anti-Semitism is the same and even type of racism, having a sense of superiority when compared to another race is a key characteristic to identifying racism. So, this is all to our podcast, to SionBen's and Manuel Espaillat's podcast. Thank you all for watching and tuning in, and I really do hope that we can go back to normal here and in our world and go to college and have a wonderful day and take care. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for listening.